Okay, this afternoon I do want to dive in more to the topic of carbon. And basically, I have this talk I've entitled Carbonomics. It's going to approach kind of a big picture view of soil health from what I think is kind of a unique perspective. It helps me understand it. I hope it's going to help you understand it as well. So first of all, I'm going to give you just a little bit more background on where we farm. This is where we live right here. I say if you could take the 48 continental United States and put a dot right in the very center, it would be right down here across the Kansas border. We're just north of that, just a little bit. We farm about 2,500 acres there. We're 2/3 dry land, and about 25 to 26-inch rainfall area is what we're in. A third of our ground is irrigated. We've traditionally been a corn-bean rotation. We try to get cereals in there as much as possible. Used to be wheat, but now we're growing rye, triticale, oats, and barley for our cereal grains. We've also recently started growing vetch and sunflowers and buckwheat and things like that. We've been doing cover crops since 2009 on a pretty regular basis, and we started green cover seed that same year, partially because when we started doing cover crops, we found it was hard to find a lot of these different types of seeds. So we started bringing them in from all over and then started selling them. So what I want to try to do here this afternoon is to try to give you a good picture of one of the most complex systems in the world, in my opinion, and that's this whole system of the soil. What's going on in the soil? And I want to do that by comparing it to an equally complex system, but one we already inherently understand, and that's the system of the economy of a country. And you may think, well, what in the heck do those two things have to do with each other? Well, probably as much as what Nehemiah had to do with soil, rebuilding the soil. So I kind of have weird talks, but there's so many parallels because the soil operates as an economy. And when we can look at it that way, we will fundamentally understand it better. We all understand economics because we live in an economy every day of our life. You know, there's all kinds of cartoons written about the economy. This one, the rich guy there says, "Relax, my broker says the economy is going to bounce back." And the bum on the street says, "I am your broker." You know, so we understand economics because that's where we live every day of our life. And so there's 7 keys to a healthy economy. I'm sure that you all remember these from high school economics class, but I'm going to go through them very quickly just to kind of refresh our memories on what these things are, and then we'll look at how these apply to our soil. So first of all, in a strong and healthy economy, we have to have supply. Somebody has to be producing something. We can't have a very good economy if we're not producing something. Strong economies are very productive, and within that production system, the vast majority of people in the economy are producing something. And diversity is very important. I'm going to say this over and over again during this talk because it can't be overstated how important diversity is, whether it's in the economy of a country or within the economy of a soil. So after you produce things, somebody has to want to buy it. So you have to have demand as well within your economy. Strong economies have a high demand for products, and again, diversity is very important because our economy would not be very good if everybody only wanted to buy 1 or 2 things. We also need currency because currency is what links the buyers and the sellers together. It allows for quick, efficient, and fair transactions and exchanges between the producers and consumers. And to be a good currency, everybody has to want it, everybody has to accept it, and it needs to have different forms and flow back and forth really easily. So I can go into any store in the United States and buy something with cash or a credit card. Not everybody takes checks anymore, but there's different forms of currency that I can use. Capital is simply, think about capital this way. If you have excess currency, you can turn it into capital. And you can do that in the form of a savings account in the bank. You can invest in equipment, you can invest in land, you can invest in cattle, but you can't have capital unless you have excess currency because that's where your capital comes from. It's basically accumulated, stored, or saved currency. Energy and resources are very important for an economy. Energy will drive the system, but it's typically one of the more expensive parts of an economy. And the resources provide a base for growth and expansion. So you see some of the resources that our United States economy is based on there. Infrastructure will allow an economy to grow beyond the subsistence level if you want to grow things, if you want to grow beyond just taking care of your own family, you have to have some infrastructure to grow that economy. Communication and transportation are the two most important ones, and we're going to be talking about those today. And then finally, defense and protection, because in a strong economy, that you're always going to have those who want to consume without producing. You're always going to have those who want to consume without producing. Now, I will avoid any political statements on that, but we're going to look at how this plays out within the soil, because there are those in our soil that want to consume without producing, and we need to protect that. And the only way you can do that is you have to invest some of your capital in order to protect your economy. So there's the 7 keys. See, I just took a whole semester of high school econ and boiled it down to 4 minutes for you. Congratulations. So we're going to look at these keys, and we're going to look at how they also apply to a healthy soil. Okay? That's our goal here. So, first of all, on the soil economy, the first thing we need to understand is based on solar energy. We would have nothing as farmers without the sun. Really, all we do as farmers is we're taking sunlight and we're converting it into something that somebody wants. It's pretty simple, actually, but it's all based on the solar energy of the sun. And then when we look at the players within this economy, there's 3 main groups of players. Obviously, we have the soil, and obviously we have the plants. We all know that. We're farmers, we plant plants in the soil, and we see all that. But this is the one right here that's most often overlooked. And I call it animals, but it really is biology, because I'm not going to focus so much on the large animals, the livestock, like cattle, sheep, hogs, things like that, but we're going to be focusing mainly on these little small critters, the microbiology, the fungus, the bacteria, the nematodes, earthworms we can see, and that's a fun one to look at, but there's so many more that we can't see. But it needs to have this interaction between the 3 different entities within this economy to make it work. So we're going to look at these 7 keys. We're going to look at how these different players play into that, and how does that translate into your farm. So first of all, on the supply side, plants produce carbon. It's pretty simple. This is the most important chemical formula in the entire world. Okay, you've all seen this. You all know what it is. This is photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide, which people think is a waste product, okay? All the global warming, too much CO2, it's plant food, okay? Thank you very much, we'll take some of that. Plus water, with the energy of the sun, with the magic of chlorophyll, don't ask me how that works, but plants have to have chlorophyll in order to make this process work, and it can produce glucose, C6H12O6, which is a simple sugar, and oxygen, 2 things that are very good, very useful. This carbon molecule right here in this glucose molecule, we're going to see how it changes how plants use that to drive this whole economic system that's going on below our feet. So plants produce carbon. You may think that you're growing corn, you're growing soybeans, you're growing whatever, but really what those plants are doing is they're producing simple sugar called glucose, and it's that carbon molecule that really drives the whole system. What does the soil provide to the economy? Well, soil provides nutrients. Now, over here on the right-hand side, I copied this off the internet. This is a place that was saying, here's all the things that plants need to grow. Ignore nitrogen, because nitrogen does not come from the soil. Most of these other ones, though, sulfur doesn't either, but these other ones, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, iron, manganese, the list goes on. The soil provides many of these nutrients for us. Now, we'll show later on how a lot of our soils aren't giving this to our plants, and I'll show you why. But the soil provides these nutrients because soils are made up of minerals, and most of these nutrients are minerals. The soil also provides habitats for the roots and the biology. The plants need a place to grow, the bugs need a place to live, and that's what the soil does. It provides that habitat. And then, again, very important, soil provides water storage, critical role, especially when you get out my area in west where our water is more limited. We have to be able to store it. And I think Russ was talking earlier about every % of organic matter that you can add on, you gain another 25 to 27,000 gallons per acre of available water storage. So when we doubled our organic matter on our ground from 1.7 to 3.4, I can now hold 40,000 gallons of water per acre more than what my neighbor does if he's still at 1.7. Huge, huge advantage for me. So that's what the soil provides to this economy. What do the bugs do? What does the biology provide? Lots of things. They provide nutrients through fixation. We'll talk about that process here in a little bit. But also, very importantly, they provide many nutrients to the plants through nutrient cycling and through nutrient availability. Remember I said that our soils contain a lot of these minerals that the plants need, but the way God created the system, plants were never designed to pull the minerals out of the soil. Plants can't do that. They're extremely inefficient at extracting minerals out of the soil. The biology is very efficient at doing that, and then the biology gives it to the plants. And we'll look at how that whole interaction works. So the biology is providing nutrients through fixation, cycling, and availability. And they also provide a lot of the defense and the protection mechanisms that go on within a natural system. On the demand side, plants need a few things. They need nutrients and they need water mainly. We know that because we deal with that all the time. But they also need services like protection, support, things like that. We understand those very well. Soil needs carbon. You know, soil without carbon is very, very unproductive. It turns very light colored. It's a poor soil. So soil needs carbon, and the plants are giving that to it. But it also needs services, protection, and things like that. Because when the soil can't protect itself. The soil can't cover itself. So it needs the plants to provide that protection. It needs the biology to provide some of that protection as well, mainly the plants. So that's what the soil needs. And the biology, they're living creatures. They need the same thing that you and I do. They need a place to live and something to eat. And they have very simple needs, but if you don't meet those needs, you're not going to have those guys there to help you out. So when you provide the food and the habitat, and I tell people, if you start thinking about soil as a habitat for living creatures and not just some medium where plants grow, you will treat it differently and you will start managing your farm differently to try to turn your soil into a habitat for biology. Now, in a strong economy, in a strong human economy, the leading indicator that your economy is very healthy is low unemployment rate. Because that means the majority of people within your economy are productive. They're doing something. They have a job. They're contributing. And when they contribute, then they have money, and we know they're going to go out and buy things as well. So you've got everybody not only producing something, but they're also consuming something. And that's the best indicator that you have a really strong, healthy economy. And it's the same way in our farm economy, in our soil economy. We want everybody producing, we want everybody taking something, but we want everybody producing mainly. The soil economy is strongest when plant, soil, and animals are all producing and consuming. And again, the diversity is very important. But here's what we've done. Remember, we've got the plants, we've got the soil, and we've got the biology. We do a pretty good job with the plants as farmers. We understand the soil, kind of, but we've largely ignored the biology in the way that we farm over the last many years. And I'm talking in general terms. I know some people are doing a much better job than others. But here's what happened, and I'll talk about our farm in particular because we have done this to ourselves. I have this concept that I call agricultural welfare. Since this is an economic example, we can talk about welfare. When we externally provide the plant with everything that it needs from the outside, particularly fertility inputs and crop protection inputs, then we weaken the economy. We basically are replacing what the biology should be doing. We're replacing it with a jug, or with a sprayer, or with some sort of a pass through the field. And what happens is we're telling the biology you're no longer needed, go to the unemployment line. Okay, we've broken the economy. Now we can cover that up, and what happens when we don't have biologically active soils, we see our plants start to suffer. They turn yellow, they're not getting enough nitrogen. So what do? We provide some welfare. We come in, we give it some fertility. Okay, well that perks it up. Now we've got these weeds growing, or now we've got a disease coming on. So we swoop in from the outside, we provide the welfare. And we fix the system because we've kind of broken it in the first place. So when we do that, I call that agricultural welfare. Now, again, I'm preaching to myself as much as anybody here because we're not doing all of the things that we should be doing. We want to get there, but we're not doing it yet. I'll tell you in a little bit here about some of the goals that we have on our farm. Abraham Lincoln said, "You cannot help men permanently by doing for them what they could and should do for themselves." Now, he was talking about a welfare system for people, but notice, he never says, we should never help people. He's not saying that at all. He says we can't help people permanently if we can continue to do for them what they could and should do for themselves. And I think it's the same way with our soil. We're not going to permanently fix our soils. We're not going to permanently rebuild and restore our soils if we continue to do for the soil everything that it could and should do for itself. And we know that our soils can do it for themselves because the way, when we look at any type of native system, it's a very healthy, it's a very productive system. Our soils were doing just fine before we came here and started farming them. The way that they were created to work, the interactions between plants, the soil, and the biology works very, very well. But we've largely taken the biology out of it, and so we have to step in and provide this welfare. On our farm, our goal over the next 5 years is we want to reduce our fertility inputs by 50%, and we want to try to reduce our herbicide inputs by 50%. We no longer use any insecticides at all, so we're not really worried about reducing that because we've already taken that out. But the fertility and the herbicide inputs we want to reduce by 50% over the next 5 years. We think that we can do that only if we're willing to change some other things within our system. We can't just stop doing those things and expect the system not to crash. So we need to do some other things as we go. You have to decide on your own farms what your goals are and how to reduce welfare, because we're all providing some welfare to our system. Some of it's needed. Abraham Lincoln says we should never help people. We sometimes need to help because we've kind of broken the system in the first place, but we need to figure out where we draw those lines. We need to allow the system to work the way it was created, and the most important thing, I think for us, is we need to get these guys more involved. We need to understand the biology better, and we need to treat our soil like it's a habitat and create favorable habitat for the biology to thrive, and then we'll get a lot of these results that we're looking for. Okay, so that's kind of the supply and the demand side of things. Currency, I said that currency is needed because it allows quick and efficient and fair transactions between suppliers and demanders, between producers and consumers. And we know that you can have dollar bills in your pocket and you can go and buy stuff. In our plant economy, the currency is carbon. And this is the perfect currency. It works so well. Remember photosynthesis, our plants are producing carbon. So in essence, in our economy of the soil, we're just like the government. The government runs out of money. What do? They just go crank up the printing presses and they print out a bunch more. That's kind of what we're doing in farming, except this is a good thing for the economy. We can produce more carbon simply by planting more plants. By having more plants growing more often, we produce more carbon. Carbon is the currency that drives the whole system. Plants produce it, and then they can spend it. Look at how this works. Currency, the carbon currency is important because it allows plants to purchase these services from the biology. Carbon is essential to all life forms. You and I are 19% carbon. Carbon can form over 10 million different chemical compounds. Carbon is the most important but most overlooked of all plant nutrients. How many times do you sit down with your agronomist and make a plan for how much carbon your system needs? Not very often. Carbon is the main food source for soil biology. If they don't have carbon to consume, they will die, or they're not going to grow, they're not going to multiply. Carbon can be collected through photosynthesis. Again, think of it in terms of currency. Carbon can be collected through photosynthesis. It can be spent, because we'll see how they're purchasing things from the soil organisms. It can be saved through organic matter, and it is universally desired by everybody in this economy. And it has different states. It goes from the gas, CO2 in the atmosphere, to liquid, because the carbon is in a liquid form as it moves up and down through the plant, and obviously it's a solid because that's what the organic matter is. We're 19% solid carbon. Carbon easily shifts different states, just like our currency can shift different states as well. And then when we have excess currency, I said that we can turn that into capital. That's our savings, that's our investments. That's buying equipment, that's buying cattle, that's putting money in the bank. And we can't do that unless we have excess currency. And so if we want to have more capital in our soil economy, we have to have excess carbon. And of course, the capital in our soil is going to be the organic matter. We've talked a lot about organic matter. It's incredibly important. I'm not going to go over all these functions because that's going to take too long. And I think everybody understands that soil organic matter is very important. But when we want to build organic matter levels in our soil, it's just like we want to build our savings account. We can't do that unless we have excess currency. Because you can't build your savings account if all you can do is just barely pay your bills. You have to have excess currency in order to build your savings. And it's the same way in our soil. We're not going to build organic matter levels in our soil unless we have excess carbon in the system. And back home, corn, soybeans is the primary rotation for guys. And I tell them that you will never build your organic matter levels in a corn, soybean rotation. You can't do it because there's not enough carbon being produced to have excess carbon for the soil to invest in organic matter. You're just providing enough to get by. That soil is living paycheck to paycheck, if you will, and there's never any thought for savings or for long-term investment. And so that's where cover crops come in. That's why earlier I told you that cover crops give without taking. They're giving carbon to the system, and you're not taking it off in the form of a cash grain harvest. When we haul semi-loads of corn off of our land, we get money for it. That's a good thing, of course. But we're removing a lot of carbon as well. Same way with soybeans. Cover crops allow us to put carbon into the system without removing the carbon through that cash grain harvest. That's where we get the excess currency. That's where we're able to start investing long term. That's where we have these capital investments made in organic matter, and that's why cover crops are so important. And you're never going to really build your soils without having this excess carbon, and you're not going to get that without cover crops. Capital-rich economies, they're very strong, stable, productive, resilient, and efficient. Same way with soils. When you have soils that have higher organic matter levels, they're going to be very productive, stable, resilient, and efficient. Some of the ground that we farm used to be sod ground, and we broke it out and started farming it. The organic matter levels on those fields are 4 to 4.5, as compared to, back when we first started doing this, 2.5 maybe on some of our other ground. Those soils that have higher organic matter levels year in and year out are always more productive. They're very stable. And they're much more drought resilient for us as well, because that organic matter is not only holding the moisture, but it's holding a lot of the nutrients as well. So if I can only know one thing about your soil, how much organic matter do you have is a huge, huge component of how productive, how resilient, how stable, and how efficient your system is going to be. So you should always be striving to build that, but you're never going to do that unless you have excess carbon in the system to do it. Okay, energy and resources. Energy drives the system, but is generally very expensive from a human economy standpoint. Think about it. In your farming operation, if you were to look at your budget, how much money are you spending on energy in your operation? Well, if I would ask you that question, the main thing that you would look at would be, well, how much am I spending on diesel fuel or propane or natural gas? And that's important, but for most people, and organic guys not so much, but for most of us who are not organic farmers, our number one energy expense is in nitrogen fertilizer. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit, but we spend a lot of money on energy in our farming systems, but we don't necessarily, we can cut back on that because we can collect solar energy, okay? Our solar collectors right here are much cheaper, much easier to install than these solar collectors down here. The energy that drives our system comes from the sun. We don't have to purchase nearly as much as we think. A healthy soil economy should not need significant purchase energy inputs. We know that because these soils were built with no outside input, with no purchased energy. It was just simply built from the energy of the sun. Dwayne Beck, some of you may be familiar with him. He's the director of the Dakota Lakes Research Station in South Dakota. Probably one of the better no-till soil health research stations in the country. Their goal for their research farm by the year 2050 is to basically be energy neutral. And basically, they are producing as much energy as what they're buying. And the way that they're going to do that, number one, they're going to cut down dramatically on how much nitrogen fertilizer they use, and they've got a strategy for doing that. But number two, they are growing some crops like sunflowers and rapeseed, canola, that they can crush the oil out of, and then they can turn that into diesel fuel. They can turn that into all sorts of bioenergy. And so they have a goal or a strategy of basically having this whole farm, and they've got, I don't know, 500, 600, 700 acres, of basically being energy neutral by the year 2050. I don't know if they'll get there or not. It's a great goal to try to accomplish. On our farm, again, we want to definitely reduce how much energy we're using, and the number one way to do that is we're going to try to cut down on the nitrogen fertilizer. And we'll look a little bit about that whole nitrogen cycle here in a little bit. So on the resources side, so that's the energy side of things. On the resources side, we've already talked about how carbon is the most important resource, or the most important nutrient that plants need. Okay? Well, what's number two? Well, number two is what we talk about number one, and that's nitrogen. We're always talking about how much nitrogen our plants need. Look at this pie chart. This pie chart, of course, pie charts add up to 100%. This pie chart shows what's in our atmosphere. Okay, carbon is the most important thing that plants need. They're getting it all from the atmosphere, and it's all coming from this little tiny black strip right there. Carbon dioxide, 0.03 something something percent. Okay, it's the something something percent that people worry about. Is it going up or is it going down? I don't worry about that too much because it's free plant food for me. I'll take all I can get, thank you very much. But we get all of the carbon that we need. We have all the carbon that we need from this little tiny sliver right here. Nitrogen, on the other hand, is this huge red block. 76.55% of our atmosphere is nitrogen. Yet we spend nothing on carbon dioxide. Plants just go and get it for free. We spend billions of dollars on nitrogen. What's the deal? Well, here's the deal. Good news and bad news. The good news is that the nitrogen in the atmosphere is inert. It's held very, very strongly in a triple bond. So two nitrogen molecules are bonded with three very, very strong bonds. And it's inert, and that's good, because if it wasn't inert, we'd all be dead. Because if you breathe in 76% uninert, is that a word, uninert? If you breathe in 76% nitrogen that was not inert, your body would die. You'd just be dead. So that's the good news, is that we're not dead. The bad news is, because it's inert, because it's in that triple bond, that very strong triple bond, plants can't use it either. Plants breathe it in. When they pull in air, they're pulling in nitrogen, but plants can't do it. They can't get anything out of it just like us. And so it's just coming in and out. Plants cannot utilize atmospheric nitrogen, just like our bodies can't utilize atmospheric nitrogen. It's good for us, it's bad for the plants. We'd like the plants to get to it. So we have to take atmospheric nitrogen, we take it to a factory, and I don't even know all of the processes that they use, but it's a very energy-intensive process to break that triple bond that's holding those nitrogen molecules together. Very, very expensive process, and we can break that down into a form of nitrogen that plants can use, and then we buy it as anhydrous ammonia or urea or UAN or ammonium nitrate, all these different products. It's coming from atmospheric nitrogen, but we're spending a lot of money to break that triple bond. Okay? So how did we do it before we invented all these great systems to produce nitrogen? Well, God had a plan. Okay? He gave us biology. What plants can't do, what humans spend billions of dollars to do, these tiny little bacteria that you and I can't even see, they just do it for free. Well, not for free, you'll see that. But there are bacteria that can grow on the roots of legumes, and people often say, well, I'm going to plant a legume because it can make its own nitrogen. Not true. No plant can make its own nitrogen. They cannot do it. But legume plants will allow certain bacteria to grow on their roots. They will form these little nodules, these colonies, if you will. Just think of them as nitrogen production factories. They'll allow this bacteria to grow on their plant roots, and they can take the triple bond nitrogen out of the atmosphere. They break it down into a form that plants can use. And then, here's the cool thing. They're not going to give it to the plant. Okay? They are not going to give it to the plant for free. There's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Even in the plant world. They will only give that nitrogen to the plant if the plant purchases it by trading carbon to that bacteria. Because bacteria can break the triple bond of nitrogen, but they cannot produce their own food. They have to eat carbon, and only plants can produce carbon. Okay, so they set up a symbiotic relationship. It's a buy and a sell deal. The currency is carbon, and the plant says, I will give you this carbon if you produce this nitrogen for me. And the bacteria says, well, that sounds pretty good to me. So it starts building colonies on these plant roots, and there's an exchange going back and forth, the plant giving carbon, spending the carbon to purchase the nitrogen. And we know this is true because if you have excess nitrogen in your soil, well, what happens if you have a lot of excess nitrogen in your soil and you plant soybeans out there? Are they going to nodulate very well? No, they're not going to nodulate at all, because why would you pay for something that you can get for free? And that's exactly how the plant sees it. If you have excess nitrogen in the soil, that plant will not give up its carbon to these bacteria in order to produce nitrogen, because the plant's pulling it out of the soil for free. That's why you never want to have nitrogen in your soil prior to planting the legume. You want the legume to do this sort of thing. And so the plant is using this carbon that it produces, and it's using it to buy goods and services from the biology. It's estimated anywhere from 50 to 70% of the carbon that a plant produces through photosynthesis. As much as 2/3 of that is not used by the plant at all, but it's spent or traded to the soil biology in exchange for these goods and services that they're getting. It's a very strong, very robust economy going on. Dr. Christine Jones, who's one of the top microbiologists in the country, or in the world, she's from Australia, she says from an agricultural perspective, and what she's going to be talking about here is not just bacteria that work with legumes, those are rhizobia. She's going to talk about different types of bacteria that work with other plants. So bacteria that can help provide nitrogen for a corn plant, for example. She says these are free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They're called associative diacetrophs. They're associative because they have to associate with the plant. They have to get carbon from a plant. They're diacetrophs because they fix nitrogen as N2. They're breaking that triple bond. They're making it available to other plants. But they have to be in close proximity to a plant. So these, azobacteria would be one of the types of things she's talking about. They can actually fix nitrogen and trade it to a corn plant in exchange for some of the carbon that a corn plant is producing. Very cool stuff. And so how comes we still have to put fertilizer on our corn in a healthy soil? Well, these guys aren't nearly as productive as rhizobia. You're probably limited to 30 to 50 pounds of nitrogen being produced or being fixed by these free-living critters, versus a soybean plant or an alfalfa plant that is really well nodulated can produce 200, 300, 400 pounds of nitrogen. Extremely, extremely productive nitrogen fixation factors. But it's pretty cool that there's other organisms out there that work with more than just legumes. So we've talked about carbon, we've talked about nitrogen. What about all the rest? What about all of those minerals, the phosphorus, the potassium, the iron, manganese, all these things that our soil has, but I said our soils aren't going to give them up to the plant. Plants weren't created or designed to go and get mineral resources directly out of the soil. So we need to hire a whole staff of tiny little miners to go get them. This is a really cool article from Scientific America, and it's called Mycorrhiza Fungi Run the Largest Mining Operation in the World. Very fascinating article. I love this picture. This picture right here is a highly magnified piece of feldspar, which just think of it as a tiny little grain of sand. And you see the little tunnels that have been cut into that. Those are actually hollowed out spaces inside that little tiny piece of sand. That is not being done by a plant root. Plant roots cannot do this. This is being done by fungus. And the fungus is actually secreting a strong enough chemical that will actually dissolve solid rock. And so they're excreting this chemical, and they basically bore holes into this rock. They turn that rock into a liquid, they pull it back out, and then guess what they do with it? They trade it to plants in exchange for carbon. Because just like bacteria, a fungus cannot, it can bore into solid rock, but it can't produce carbon. It has to have carbon to eat. It can't live on minerals. It has to have carbon. So the mycorrhiza fungi will do this, and they'll trade it to the plant in exchange for carbon. This is what it looks like. This is a plant root. This whole thing here is a plant root. These little black dots that are growing inside the plant root are called arbuscles. They're basically the little headquarters of this fungus. And then out through the cell wall of the plant root, it will extend these hyphae. And these hyphae are what go out and explore the soil. It's what's secreting the chemicals that will actually dissolve solid rock, and it will bring in the phosphorus, the potassium, the iron, the boron, the manganese, whatever is out there that the plant needs, these mycorrhiza can bring in. The author of this article, Jennifer Fraser, says mycorrhiza mine the soil not only for the basic things that plants need, like nitrogen, phosphorus, etc., but also the hard-to-come by things like zinc and copper and manganese, which plants need to have in order to be healthy. And she goes on to say, oddly enough, many soils are rich in important nutrients, but they're often locked up in a physical form which makes them unavailable to most plants. And we know this is true because when you get your soil test back, it is not showing you how many minerals are in your soil. It's showing you how many minerals that are in your soil are available to the plants. Okay? Big difference. And so we see people like Gabe Brown. Gabe stopped using phosphorus fertilizers probably 15 years ago. Every year since he stopped using them, his phosphorus levels on his soil test go up and up and up and up. How can that be? He stopped putting them on. Well, every year his soil becomes more and more biologically active, and the more biology that he has, the more that biology is freeing up, making available the phosphorus that's in his soil, making it available to what plants can use. And so we see this, Russ has seen this too. He's cut way back on his fertility, but yet his soil tests aren't showing that he's deficient because he's moved to a more biological system. The biology makes the minerals available to the plant, but the biology is not going to work unless the plants give it carbon. It's an economy. It's buying and selling. Okay, infrastructure, also very important. You have to have infrastructure if you want your economy to grow beyond a subsistence level. So we're going to talk primarily about transportation and communication. We know these are important because in times of war, when countries declare war on each other, this is what they do. Okay, you try to take out transportation and communication. It's long been a very favored war strategy. You bomb their bridges, their airstrips, their rail lines, things like that. You try to take out their telegraph poles back in the day. Now we would target internet communication center. But if you can disrupt transportation and communication, you will bring an economy to its knees. And it's the same way in our soils. Okay, I got to thinking about this when I was putting this talk together, and I started thinking about the interstate highway system in the United States. One of the reasons that we're such a productive economy, one of the strongest economies in the world, is we have a great transportation infrastructure. Okay, we have the interstate highway system. They're big roads. They can transport large amounts of goods and services back and forth very quickly, very efficiently. But there's a lot of the country that's not right next to an interstate. Okay, so I live right down here. You probably can't see that dot very well. I live pretty close to Interstate 80, just like a lot of you guys do. But we're still 50 or 60 miles from the interstate. So it's not real easy for me to get to the interstate if I didn't have a highway to get me there. So when you look at the map of the highways overlaid with the interstates, just about everybody in the United States is connected one way or another with a pretty decent road, a pretty decent highway that will get them to an interstate. And we've got the majority of the country covered with our transportation infrastructure. And I started thinking about that, and I was thinking how that's just like what a plant root does. You see the picture on the left is a plant root, just the main roots of the plant, and they're very big, quick, fast, efficient pathways for transportation. This is the interstate highway system. It can move a lot of material up and down, but it doesn't cover very much of the soil. When we overlay the mycorrhiza fungi, when we have this organism that is working with our plant, then we have so much more of the soil covered, we have so much more of it explored. It's like the highways that are bringing things to the interstate to have a very fast and efficient transportation system. This is another picture of mycorrhiza fungi. You can see the plant roots there. You can kind of see the little black dots up there kind of at the top. Those are those are the arbuscles. And then you see all the little hair-like things growing out the side. Those are the hyphae. And that's that's the highway that's bringing it into the plant roots. And that's what's bringing in all of the good stuff like phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium, so forth and so on. And they can even bring in water. A crop that is very highly colonized by this fungus will be extremely drought tolerant, because oftentimes you can have a plant wilting in the soil, even though there's water in the soil, if that plant doesn't have a good enough root system, because it can't get the water. It can only get the water where the roots are touching. So this mycorrhiza helps bring in more of these things. And I got to thinking that transportation infrastructure is so important that a soil system that does not have mycorrhiza like this is kind of like a farming system without roads, rail lines, or ports. It has huge potential, but it's severely limited. About 7 years ago, I was lucky enough to go to Brazil on a no-till tour with a no-till on the plains, and one of the regions that we went to was Mato Grosso. Mato Grosso is the central part of Brazil. It's where you see these pictures of these huge farms. There's individual farms up here, farmers that are farming 150,000 acres of soybeans. It's incredible. And you'll see these pictures like this where they'll have 10, 15, 20 combines all in one field. It actually is there. I saw it. They have more land just in that one part of Brazil. This is a staggering statistic. Listen to this. They've got more acres of land in Mato Grosso that they could bring into production. They're not even farming it yet. They have more acres than the combined acreage of what the United States grows in corn and soybeans combined. Almost 170 to 180 million acres in Mato Grosso alone that could be brought into production, but they're not. Why aren't they? Well, this is what their farms look like. This is what their roads look like. Brazil is a huge country, and Mato Grosso is in the very center of the country. They've got no rail lines coming out of that. They've got no interstates. They've just got highways like this, and they're congested, and it's a 3-day trip. 3-day trip one way, because everything goes out through the port. They use very little of their grain that they produce. They use very little in country, because all of their livestock is grass-fed, very little is feedlot-fed. It all has to go to a port. 3 days there, 3 days back. Think what that would do to your harvest schedule. That kind of stinks. So they're very limited. They're not developing a lot of this land because their transportation infrastructure is choking them down. If they ever get that figured out, we're going to be in big trouble over here, because not only do they have all that land, they get about 70 inches of rain a year, and their growing season allows them to grow 2 crops a year. They have a 10-month growing season. So think about that. They have huge potential, but their transportation limits them. Now, the mycorrhiza is not the only thing that is a very effective transportation system within our soils. Earthworms are a huge part of it. When an earthworm goes up and down through the soil, they leave all these channels, they leave all these tunnels, and that's a great way to have water infiltration, to have oxygen exchange. They move surface carbon residue from the top, they'll move it down deeper, and they'll even transport a lot of the other biology around. They're kind of like the public transit system in our economy, because if there's a bacteria or a fungus that's starting to decompose a piece of corn stalk, and the earthworm eats that corn stalk, it goes back down into the soil, poops that out, guess what? It just transported that bacteria or that fungus or that nematode or whatever from up here to over here. And so it's constantly moving things around. Yesterday when I was talking, there was a couple questions about spreading lime. Do I need to incorporate lime in a no-till situation? The answer is no. You don't have to. If you have a very biologically active soil, the earthworms and the other biology, they will stir that in for you. They will move a lot of that around for you. So transportation infrastructure, earthworms are hugely important there as well. And communication, to me, this is a hugely fascinating area, and it's the one I understand the least, and I understand a lot of things not very well. So plants communicate in a variety of fashions, and this is just fascinating to me. One of the ways that they do that is they use liquid carbon root exudates to communicate to the biology what they want. Because think about it, you've got this mycorrhiza, you've got other biology out there. They can deliver a variety of things. They can deliver nitrogen, phosphorus, boron, iron, water. How does it know what the plant wants? How does it know what the plant is willing to pay for, in essence? Well, the plant communicates to the biology by doing different carbon compounds. Remember I said carbon can form over 10 million different carbon compounds? Well, we're not looking at all of them here, but if the plant wants phosphorus, it will secrete a very specific type of amino acid, which is a carbon compound. If it wants boron, it will secrete a different type of amino acid. So everything that it wants has a unique signature of what is leaking out of its roots. And basically it's the signal for the biology to say, hey, this is what I want. Bring this in. I'm willing to pay for manganese. I'm willing to pay for water. I'm willing to pay for boron. And so the plant communicates by secreting these different types of carbon root exudates. You have to have the biology there to pick up the signals, but then the biology picks up the signals and delivers what the plant wants. It's kind of like the Chicago Board of Trade. Has anybody ever witnessed the Board of Trade in action? It's the craziest thing you've ever seen. It's a whole bunch of people standing around in a room, yelling at each other and making all kinds of hand gestures. Okay? It kind of sounds like one of our family reunions, right, honey? But it looks like it's crazy, but there's actually commerce going on there. They're buying and they're selling. They're communicating with each other in their own way, and they're getting business done. And that's exactly what happens in the rhizosphere, the area right around the plant roots. The plant is communicating to the biology what it wants. The biology is delivering on what the plant wants. And so it's a little miniature Board of Trade. There's commerce happening right there at the plant root level. Now, plants communicate in other ways as well. I don't have time to explain this, even if I did understand it very well. If you're interested in this whole topic of plant communication, get on the internet and go to YouTube and search for Dr. Jack Schultz. Dr. Jack Schultz, he's with the University of Missouri, and he has some great YouTube videos that talk specifically about how plants communicate with each other. That's Dr. Jack Schultz, University of Missouri. He's got some great YouTube videos, and he's run a lot of these types of experiments. But basically what he and other really smart people have discovered is that plants can communicate both through their root system, because the biologists tell me that the plant roots won't actually physically touch each other. Somehow they can steer clear of each other. So if you're going to have roots connected from one plant to another, it can only be connected through the biology. And that's where the mycorrhiza, fungi, and other biological activity can help connect the roots of two different plants together. And once they're connected like that, the plants can actually communicate with each other. So the plant on the left has aphids, and it's gearing up its plant defense systems to help ward off the aphids. But it's communicating to its neighbor over here on the right it's sending a signal through its root system somehow, and it's saying, hey guy, I've got aphids in the neighborhood, you're up. They're coming for you too. And so it can actually communicate if it's under attack. Plants can exude almost like a perfume. It's called a volatile chemical compound, very much like a perfume that other plants can sense and other insects can sense. And so when it's under attack, it will let off these perfumes that like ladybugs and lacewings and wasps and spiders, they'll smell that, and they'll know that this plant is in distress, that it's under attack by aphids. They like to eat aphids, so they'll follow that smell in, and then they'll attack the aphids. So it's almost like calling in an airstrike. But you have to have the bugs out there to pick up on that, or it doesn't work. The last category is defense and protection. Our plant soil economy needs to be protected from lots of things. Water in particular, we think that water is a good thing, and it is. We have to have it, but we have to be careful. Our soil needs to be protected from water. You've all probably seen the picture of the destructive impact of a raindrop. We know what the wind can do when the soil is unprotected. Soil cannot protect itself. It has to be protected from other members of the economy. But we also need to protect it from the wind and from heat and cold and compaction and weeds and insects and diseases, all number of things we need protection from. Several ways that the plant economy does this. Number one, you have to keep the soil covered. If you don't do this, then all of these other things really don't work very well at all. Rolf Dersch, who was our tour guide when we went to Brazil, Rolf is one of the pioneers of no-till, really worldwide, but particularly in South America. He said that almost all advantages of the no-till system come from the permanent cover of the soil, and only a few of the advantages come from not tilling the soil. So what he's saying, it's more important to keep the soil covered than it is to not till the soil. Now, it's very hard to keep the soil covered if you're continually tilling it, so they kind of go hand in hand, but his point is the benefits are coming from the soil cover, not the fact that you're not disturbing it. So we should always aim at full soil cover, because if you can keep your soil covered, that's going to protect it a lot. Second line of defense is this whole thing of communication. Plants will communicate with each other. Again, if you're interested, you can look up the Scientist magazine. I don't particularly subscribe to the Scientist magazine, so I had to look this up online. Great article in here. This is the exact type of stuff that Dr. Jack Schultz will talk about in his videos. But it's just showing how plants communicate both through their root system. They can talk to each other this way. They can communicate with each other through these perfumes that they emit, and also they can communicate with insects. So that's bringing in the communication aspect is a big defense mechanism. A third line of defense is symbiotic relationships. This is a picture of a plant root. I got this from the Noble Foundation down in Oklahoma. They're working with developing novel endophytes. An endophyte is a type of fungus that can live inside of a plant root, and it provides protection against diseases for that plant, protection against drought, all sorts of things, in exchange for carbon, because the fungus cannot produce its own food, but it can provide benefits that plant is willing to pay for. And then a fourth line of defense is simply diversity. When you have a very diverse system, it's hard to be completely attacked. Because think about it, most things that are going to attack your system, they're looking for one or two things in particular that they're going to try to take out. And so if an insect or a disease comes into this cover crop down here that has 8 or 10 or 12 different things growing in it, it's not going to know what to attack first. And if it's a corn disease, I may not have any corn in there or have very little amount of corn. It may attack that, but the rest of it's going to be fine. So when we have diversity within the system, we have a much, much better chance of not having disease issues, not having weed pressure, not having insect issues, because the system balances itself out. So we went through the 7 keys to a healthy soil, and just real briefly, I know I'm up against my time, I just real briefly want to give you 10 takeaway points. This is just summarizing this whole talk. These are the things I want you to remember. Number 1, economies are intricately interconnected and interdependent. You cannot go messing with one of these parts without affecting the others. And by and large, what we've done in conventional agriculture is we have taken the biology out, not necessarily on purpose, but we've just kind of ignored it. But because we've taken the biology out, it has definitely affected the plant community and the soil community, and so we have to swoop in with our agricultural welfare to make up for that. So that's number two. We need to try to reduce the amount of agricultural welfare that we have, get everyone in the economy working the way that they were created to work. It's a good system. We need to just put it back as much as we can to the way it was created to work. Number three, increase your cash flow of carbon currency. Who doesn't want to have more cash flow? Well, our soil wants more cash flow too, so we need to have more plants growing more of the time in order to get cash flow. If you're in a corn-soybean rotation, you are less than 50% efficient at collecting solar energy and producing liquid carbon. On a nice sunny day like this, if you're a farmer and you don't have a cover crop growing, you have no right to enjoy a nice sunny day in March because you've got nothing growing to capture this solar energy. It's being wasted, okay? You should only enjoy days like this if you've got a nice green cover crop. And I will say this, we flew into Harrisburg, we drove down to Gettysburg and then around and everywhere. You guys are doing a whole lot better job of getting cover crops planted than my neighbors in Nebraska are. We saw a lot more green fields here than I see when I drive around back home. So you're doing a good job. Keep that cash flow coming. Get more diversity into your system. Don't just do corn and soybeans, but do the rye or triticale cover crops. Integrate a cereal crop if you can. If you've got livestock to integrate, that's even better. Number four, make capital investments of long-term carbon, organic matter, and don't sell off those investments. So by bringing cattle in, by growing some of these bigger cover crops that you can only do if they're planted in the summer, like after a wheat crop, you can really start building organic matter levels in. And then don't sell off your investment. You know, if you're doing this and you don't have to, and I know my organic friends in here, there's times when they have to till, just like me as a non-organic guy, there's times I have to spray. Our goal should be to reduce either one of them. But when we're doing this and we don't have to, and this drives me crazy because I've got non-organic neighbors that are doing this all the time, they're selling off the investments that they've made in their soil. Drives me crazy. Solar energy is free. Use every opportunity to have plants capture it, boost your economy. So don't just do corn in your rotation, put in cover crop rye, and then soybeans, and then follow it with a cereal grain crop here, and then a big cover crop, and then bring cattle in to graze it. If people have a worn out soil and they want to rebuild it as fast as possible, in my area, this may or may not work here for you guys, this is the best recipe I can give the guys back home. Corn, cover crop, soybeans, cereal grain, big cover crop, bring in cattle and graze them properly. And this is the fastest way to rebuild our soils back where I'm from. Number six, take advantage of free manufacturing and free mining resources. Do whatever you can to get more of these mycorrhiza, get more rhizobia, and this is only going to work if you have legumes in your system. Get these guys working for you. They'll work for carbon. They'll work for carbon. Get them working. Employ lots of tiny workers, miners, transporters, communicators, and protectors. Get as much biological diversity as you can. I like the odds. If I could attract every bug in creation to my ground, I like the odds. A lot of people are worried about bringing in insects to their place because they think they may get a bad one. Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, who I think was in the area last year, you may have heard of, he says that for every pest for a crop, there are 1,700 either good or neutral insects that will come along with it. So if you can attract all the insects that you can, the odds of having good ones versus bad are really good. Number 8, build and do not destroy your infrastructure. You will really see your economy grow. So focus on getting as many earthworms going as you can. Really focus on getting mycorrhiza built up and going. And then don't do this unless you absolutely have to. Because remember I said, when you are declaring war on another country, you try to tear down their transportation infrastructure. So when you do this and you don't have to, you're declaring war upon your soil. Number 9, protect your economy with soil armor. Keep that ground covered as much as possible. Whatever it takes to get ground cover out there, that needs to be an integral part of your rotation. And number 10, diversity is so very important for a healthy economy, plants, roots, and soil animals. And what I always tell people with diversity, it's hard. You know, we have diversified our cash cropping rotation. So So now we're growing vetch and sunflowers and all sorts of weird stuff. But to do that, it takes specialized equipment, it takes specialized knowledge, and you have to have a specialized market to really get diverse in what you're harvesting and selling into the marketplace. But for a cover crop, you don't need specialized equipment, you don't need specialized knowledge, and you don't need a specialized market to get diversity in the cover cropping system. That's the beauty of it, is that the harvesting is done by the soil itself. The harvesting is being done by the biology. So get diversity in your cover crops whenever possible.